Hey, this is Dominic, and this is your home for the cutting-edge conversations on optimizing your personal performance, lighting up your sex life, and living a purpose-driven life of your own design.
These are the topics that Dominic and I have both struggled with in our own lives and still don't always get right. This is Brian. Welcome to the Great Man Podcast.
What if I were to tell you that anger is our friend? Not a nice friend, not a gentle friend, but a very, very loyal friend. It will always tell us when we've been betrayed. And it will always tell us when we've betrayed ourselves. That's a quote from Julia Cameron in her book, The Artist's Way. Anger is a potent life force energy that very few men have an empowering relationship with. For many of us, anger sabotages. It gnaws away at our insides. It's a ticking time bomb. It causes us to say and do things that we regret. It harbors resentment with the people that we love. Gentlemen, there is no way that we can be our best selves, our great man, when we have such a disempowering relationship with our anger. And yet, anger also holds the potential to be an incredible gift if we can learn to build our capacity to work with this powerful emotion. When a man learns how to experience his anger without suppressing, without exploding, he then finds his power. A man who knows how to navigate his anger speaks up for what he believes in. He maintains his boundaries. He creates safety for others in the doing so. He resolves conflicts. He's not afraid of conflict. He resolves conflicts and dissolves resentment. A man who can work with anger in this way is trustworthy, empowered, and sometimes, guys, even sexy. I polled the women in my Instagram audience, and 85% of them affirmed that yes, a man who can express anger from a conscious and resourceful place is sexy. So in this episode today, Brian and I are going to be sharing with you how to stop suppressing, or how to stop suppressing and then exploding your anger, why suppressed anger over time leads to resentment, exhaustion, and cynicism, which in turn builds walls between you and the people that you love or the people that you depend on in your workplace. The 4 types of messages that anger is oftentimes trying to communicate to you if you can quiet down and listen. And how the board of directors for your emotions visualization technique that we've talked about a number of times on the show saved me from acting from a place of anger that could have caused 6 months of chaos in my life. And I'll share that story today. And then finally, 3 practices to train your nervous system to handle anger more resourcefully and powerfully. And if there's one thing that I want you guys to take away from this episode, it's making the commitment to turn pro with respect to your relationship with anger. 3 or 4 episodes ago, Brian and I talked about this decision in your life to turn pro, which means making the inner commitment, the inner shift, the decision to live in alignment with your highest self, to pursue your great man. And if you want to have an empowering relationship with anger, you can no longer be an indentured servant to its whims, to its trigger, to its overwhelming energy. You have to make the decision to turn pro, to say, I'm going to train differently the next time that anger strikes. And this episode is equipping you with the tools you need to take that decision to turn pro and to bring it into action. So here is episode number 8 of the Building Your Best Self series, Working with Anger.
Dominic, we are on the heels of an amazing immersion weekend with the Mastermind up at a place called Menla in the Catskills, upstate New York. And I'm feeling, I got a lot of energy from that weekend. And when I came back, one of the first people I talked to was my dad, who lives down in Arizona with my mom. In the conversation, I was explaining to him about some of the things that we did over the weekend and how you were leading it, and some other guys took some leadership roles in that. And so he cuts me off. He's like, how's Dominic doing? how's he doing? I said, he's doing pretty good. He goes, well, is he dating anybody? Like, what's his situation? What's his love situation? And I said, he's not dating anybody right now. But one of the things that he talked a lot about during the weekend is his readiness to find his partner, to find his queen, like someone that he can spend the rest of his life with. And he's really excited and really open about that. And my dad, without skipping a beat, goes, well, great. Tell him to come down to Arizona. Like there's a ton of good looking women down here. Like he'll love it. And I said, oh, that's great, Dad. I said, well, are they also like really great humans? Are they really are they people doing the work? And he's like, I don't know. I don't talk to them. I can just tell you they're good looking. So tell them to come down here.
I was going to say, what was the look on his face when you asked that question? First of all,
I don't know.
I love that Mr. Stacy's got my back. And Mr. Stacy, if you're listening, thank you. I appreciate that. And maybe I will come to Arizona. I've been to Arizona. There are some beautiful women in Arizona. But yeah, dude, this past weekend was incredible. We get together every 6 months with this mastermind. So this is Mastermind 1.0. We get together every 6 months. Mastermind 2.0 is getting together for our first time next month. So that's going to be incredible. Our digital mastermind, we're still trying to figure out how do we make something like that, like an in-person thing happen. These big shifts occur when we're together. And one thing I have to share about this past weekend was it was my birthday weekend, right? November 7th is my birthday. I turned 43 and I intentionally decided to schedule this immersion over my birthday weekend because, who better to spend my birthday with than 20 guys who I love and trust more than anyone in the world. And you guys flipped the script on me because on Friday night, a few days before my birthday, you surprised me with a king's chair. A king's chair is basically, they set down a chair in the middle of the room. The king gets to sit in it while everyone else sits around you. And then one by one, each man comes up and tells you what he admires about you. And I had the opportunity to sit on the receiving end of, it was like an hour and a half of just one man after another, men who I know deeply, some guys for 30 years of my life, other guys for a year and a half, who we've been on a big emotional journey. And dude, it was the most overwhelming, intense experience of receiving love that I've ever had in my life. My nervous system was not prepared to handle that onslaught. I think we called it the fire hose of love that you guys were spraying. That was the term. Yeah, of course. When you're a group of men, there's always innuendo, spraying
involved.
The fire hose of love for an hour and a half. I could barely go to sleep that night, and it goes to show how even with the most beautiful emotions, even when getting attention that we all crave and love, that we all work our asses off to experience, when the moment finally arises. I believe my nervous system and capacity is pretty well trained to handle this stuff. I wasn't up to the task. It was beautiful and exhausting at the same time.
And it was a gift for everybody there too, Dominic, because it was a gift seeing you process, seeing you who's done a lot of work, wow, this is overwhelming in a most beautiful way, but still nervous system is fried. I don't know if I can take anymore.
Yeah.
So that was a gift, just witnessing that. And then the other gift was just hearing the impact that both you and this work and this group of guys has had on each man outside of just themselves. They talked about their families. They talked about the other people that are in their lives that are important, and just seeing that kind of impact and seeing the results of where they're at compared to where they were a year and a half ago. To see that insight to their window of life was a beautiful gift for everybody in the room.
I'm getting emotional hearing you talk about it, so we're going to have to make a pivot here real quick. But I'm still sitting here looking at the 20 birthday cards that you all sent to me, that you all handed me at the immersion. I have not been able to open them yet because I still haven't fully metabolized all the love you guys gave me a week ago. So it was a week ago today. Eventually I will, and then those cards will be open. That'll be another layer.
Well, that's why I didn't give you a card. So there's only 19 there.
Okay.
I didn't want to further overwhelm you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm sure that's exactly the place that you came from on that. So one of the reasons why we're bringing up immersion, not just because it just happened, but because of one of the big topics that came up at our immersion, even when the theme of the weekend was adventures in love. We've been exploring our capacity to love and to be loved. How big can we open our hearts to the romantic relationships, to our families, to our businesses, to our friendships? That was the theme of our last 90 days and the weekend. Even still, during that conversation, the one emotion that came up in a potent way over the weekend was this emotion of anger. In Mastermind 2.0 and the Digital Mastermind, emotion of anger over these last few weeks have come out in a big way for many of the men involved. I like to say that there are three big energies that sabotage most men who don't practice training our nervous systems to handle them. And the big energies are the energy of fear, which sabotages us, sexual energy, which oftentimes can hijack our system and overwhelm us and override, and then the emotion and the energy of anger, right? When that energy of anger comes in, it can be big and it can fry the circuitry in our nervous systems. It can blow our nervous systems out. We all know the experience of when anger rips through your body, of exploding, of saying the thing that you can't take back, of punching a wall, maybe doing something worse. Who knows, right? Like that irreparable damage that may feel powerful in the moment when it's being expressed, but then afterwards, the guilt, the shame, or that feeling of anger coming up and then the tripwire, the circuit breaker that just shuts down that anger because we don't trust it. We're afraid of anger. And then we end up eating the shit sandwich, and then it leads to resentment, right? And disempowerment and exhaustion. Many of the guys kind of oscillate in those areas. So today we want to dedicate this part of our conversation around looking at anger as a gift in our lives, because it carries such incredibly important and potent information if we learn and get in the dojo and train with it.
Yeah, it's so interesting that the topic was love, but anger kept coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Esther Perel talks about the opposite of love. It's actually not anger. It's not like a betrayal or cheating. What it is, it's apathy.
Indifference, yeah.
Indifference. It's no wonder when I think about my dating history, and I think about all the women that I dated and how often I got angry, hardly ever. Very few times that I actually get angry, because when something went wrong, I was just like, doesn't matter. Like, next, break up and move on to the next thing. With Becca, I get angry, and it never feels good in the moment. It feels overwhelming. But I know that there is some intelligence there. There's a reason, like, oh, interesting, in this relationship, I do get angry about these things. So we talk about this intelligence that anger can bring if we allow it. That's powerful. I'm excited to have that conversation.
Great. And I think what you just brought in here is important to note. The reason why anger came up so many times during our conversations about love is our inability to navigate that big energy of anger is an incredible barrier, a wall between our ability to love fully and to receive love fully. Think about this, for example. If you're someone who suppresses anger, maybe if in your relationship with Becca or anyone who's listening, a relationship with their significant other, if you're unable to express your anger and it shuts down and you eat the shit sandwich, that anger leads to resentment. Resentment is like a 30-foot wall, 100-foot wall made of steel, like a Fort Knox fortress around your heart and your ability to connect with someone else. And that only gets bigger over time. So the importance of being able to deal with anger and to navigate it not only is from a sense of like your own personal power and authenticity, but it's also to feel love and connection with the people that you really desire to get close to.
Vienna Farrow is a pretty famous psychologist in New York, and she talks about resentment. She shows this chart, and it's all these different emotions that we can have as it pertains to relationship. Resentment was number one as a relationship killer. That's romantic or otherwise. Resentment, the number one thing. And so if we don't process this anger, which is natural and can be really good, right, and it leads to resentment, that's a much bigger fish to fry.
On resentment, Mark Melvin, he taught a session this weekend on forgiveness. And one of the things that stands in the way of forgiveness is resentment. And many of us know that experience of hanging on to resentment, even when we know it's not serving us, but we hang on to it because resentment allows us to be self-righteous. You know what I mean? Like we get to be right. We get to be morally superior over another person. It's like, I'm the one who's putting all the work into this relationship, or I'm the one who's bringing home the bacon, and that person's they're not appreciating me. And what Mark ended up saying, and I heard this term in Sex Addicts Anonymous, and it's big in the 12-step rooms. Resentment is like drinking poison while hoping the other person will die. right? It's ridiculous. Like resentment is a poison that you're drinking thinking the other person is going to die. And little, like along the way, it just eats away at your insides.
Right. And the lies that we tell ourselves about, like, well, this is what motivates me. I'll never let this thing happen again. Right. Like all bullshit. Like it doesn't, it's a very toxic motivation, if anything.
So let's get into this. We're going to get into some real world examples of like how anger has shown up in our lives and how we've dealt with it in some non-resourceful ways and then also in some resourceful ways. But I think the first place to start here is with a little insight from Julia Cameron, who wrote the book, The Artist's Way. And that's the book that I've been in love with over the last 6 months because it's helped me to open up my creative portals. And she has a particular take on anger. She says, anger is our friend. Not a nice friend, not a gentle friend, but a very, very loyal friend. It will always tell us when we've been betrayed, and it will always tell us when we've betrayed ourselves. I love that. It's a friend, not a nice friend, not a gentle friend. It's a loyal friend. And what she's saying here is it will always tell us when we've been betrayed and when we've betrayed ourselves. What we're talking about here is that anger carries information. And we oftentimes don't want to feel anger. We make it wrong primarily because, again, it's a big energy that fries out our nervous systems. We've done things that we regret. We don't know how to say what we want to say from a resourceful standpoint. It's something that can just blow us off our equilibrium. But if we learn to step into the dojo and train with this, then we can see that anger is, in fact, our friend. Oftentimes, anger can inform, I would say, one of four things. You're feeling angry, potentially because number one, there's a value of yours that has been threatened, right? There's something that you hold of value that has been threatened. We'll give examples of each of these. We'll go deeper. Number two, there's a boundary of yours that's been crossed. And that emotion of anger is coming up to say, this boundary has been crossed. I'm pissed off. And now I have to do something about that. The third one is that there's some trauma that's been triggered, right? There's some pain of yours that's been undealt with, that's been triggered. That's number three. And number four is that maybe there's something in your operating system that actually is in need of an upgrade. And this anger is a signal for that. Maybe some sort of like insecurity, or maybe there's like a tender, vulnerable part of you that feels threatened. And then you get angry to protect that. But that part of you actually is stronger than you think and doesn't need that explosive or that fierce protection anymore, but you just haven't looked at that in a while. So just a quick recap, and then Brian, I'll come to you, see what's coming up. Anger is oftentimes a signal that a value of yours is being threatened, a boundary has been encroached, some trauma has been triggered, or there's a part of your operating system that could be in use of an upgrade.
I saw a great display of anger about 2 months ago. My nephew is 5 years old, and for his birthday, there were presents sent to my sister's house, and she took a video of him opening these presents. He opened up one present, and there's like a Woody toy and a Buzz Lightyear toy, and he's very excited about this. He opens up another present, and he pulls up a shirt. And mind you, before I tell you the rest of the story, they've been working, and this is great news for all humans on Earth. They've been working in his school on feeling your emotions, being able to identify your emotions, like what is going on in your body as it happens. And the reason I say this is a great display of anger is because when he pulls up this shirt, he looks at it and he throws it on the ground, stomps his foot, looks at his mom and says, "I'm so angry right now." And my sister does not miss a beat. She goes, "Okay, buddy, like you're angry right now. Like, why are you angry?" He said, "I can't play with a shirt. It's not fun."
That's so honest. How many times did you experience that as a kid, man?
It's so honest. And he was able to articulate it. And clearly, of those four reasons that we get angry, Dominic, that you just mentioned, like a value was crossed for him. Mm-hmm. His expectation was that his value was he could play with his gifts. And you can't play with a t-shirt.
Dude, that is such a great story and it's so relatable. I mean, think about that. I remember when we were kids in birthday parties, you hand the kid the like, his present, and then you would always know when it was like clothes. So like, the kid would open, like grab the box and then everyone would yell clothes and everyone would be like bored. And whoever gave the kid the gift of the clothes was like all embarrassed. And then the kid who got you the Voltron or whatever the cool gift was at the time was like the hero. But that story is great because it leads to this passage from a book that I've referenced a number of times now. It's written by Bell Hooks. Bell Hooks is a feminist author who's written dozens of books. And one of them on masculinity is called The Will to Change. And she talks about how at a young age, boys commit soul murder. Boys are forced to commit soul murder because we're not allowed to express our emotions, right? And the one emotion that we are allowed to express is anger. And she has some things to say about that. She says, boys are encouraged by patriarchal thinking. And patriarchy at the highest level is basically a system that's set up favoring masculine energy, masculine domination, subordinating everything else. Boys are encouraged by patriarchal thinking to claim rage as the easiest path to manliness. It should come as no surprise then that beneath the surface, there is a seething anger in boys, a rage waiting for the moment to be heard. Much of the anger boys express is itself a response to the demand that they don't show any other emotions, which I think is hugely powerful. Anger feels better than numbness because it often leads to more instrumental action. Anger can be, and usually is, the hiding place for fear and pain. What she's saying here, man, is that one of the reasons why we have such a troubling relationship with anger, there's multiple reasons here. We stuff down our emotions. They're not manly. We're not allowed to feel sad. We're not allowed to feel insecure. We're not allowed to feel weak. We're not allowed to feel the range of complex emotions. From a very early age, we commit soul murder. So what happens? That gets stuffed down. And then there's inner worlds of ourselves that no one else knows about. And we're angry at that. We know that we're living a fucking lie. We know that. Even though we can't articulate it, we know on some level unconsciously that we're living a fucking lie. And then all of a sudden, something triggers us and we get angry, and that thing comes through like a freight train and it blows off that cap, that governor that we have on top of all of our emotions. And there's this release that feels intoxicating because finally, for a brief moment in time, there's freedom, right? Freedom and power and some genuine, authentic expression of how we're feeling in that moment. But yet we're left to pick up the pieces after it's over. And then we have that shame cycle and that guilt spiral, which then leaves us even more confused than we were in the first place.
Yeah, I have a very real story associated with my first business. And it describes the exact path that you talked about. I was working with a business partner. I felt for a while that I wasn't being heard. I was actually being blocked from like really running the business in the way it had to be run. Didn't say anything. And then when finally the last straw, when that governor popped off, I got angry and it felt so good to let it loose.
Yeah, right?
To rip off that email to all of our investors, to take action, to just try to decimate like this other person. And man, did it feel good. And it caused all kinds of collateral damage with lawyers and relationships. And it took over a year to just unwind that, taking up my energy, my direction, other things that I wanted to be doing in life. I had to continually deal with that because I exploded, because that governor popped off. I didn't take the time to process and get curious around like, well, what is this about? Like, what's going on and how long has this been going on?
Yeah, dude, let's take a look at that example in its entirety. Let's look at everything leading up to that explosive moment. All those months of just eating the shit sandwiches, that resentment building, the feeling of disempowerment, not authentic expression, the distance between you and your business partners, right? Just like all the fracturing, how many months of it were involved with that. And then you just said, after the explosion, the brief moment of liberation followed by a year worth of cleaning up the mess and the collateral damage.
And all the stories and excuses that come with it.
Yeah.
I felt justified. I felt like I did what was right for me, the investors, the business. Like I was right. And I hung my hat on that for a long time.
Yeah.
It didn't help. It didn't help the feeling. I was still angry. I mean, that's moving from anger to resentment. That was the story that I was caught up in. I want to explain the final straw really quick because I think it's important. The final straw for me after not speaking up for the business, myself, and investors for a period of time was a belief that something was done where we're not in this together anymore.
Yep.
Where like, oh, we are actually on opposite sides of the battle here. And like, fine, game on. Once I came to that realization, man, that was, without thinking, that was just it. Boom, the explosion.
Yep. I've got a story that you just triggered in a good way, not triggered in a traumatic way. Was you got to be careful these days when someone says trigger, man, that's a way to get canceled, right? So I think I've shared parts of this story before on the podcast, but last year when my book was about to launch, which then, a week before launch, after having 2,000, copies pre-sold, I'm excited to send them out to all the people who bought them and then my big clients who bought like hundreds of copies. When the copies of the book arrived a week before everything was about to drop, the books had 3 spelling errors on the back and it referred to the book as a Bach. The quality of the book was garbage. Everything was wrong with it. And when I had a conversation with the publisher, because this is DEFCON 5 or whatever the highest, the worst DEFCON is, when we brought this, when Callie, my chief operating officer, and then Marina, my brand manager, when the 3 of us brought this to the publisher, he immediately got defensive and started downplaying the quality of the book. He started blaming us for it. He didn't take any ownership over it. And all of a sudden, I started to feel rage inside it, like rage, like, that just like Hulk, like the Incredible Hulk type of rage. I wanted to reach down the guy's throat and pull his trachea out, and just rip him apart. And he was also being really I would say he was being disrespectful to Callie. Like he would speak over her, a woman. He would let me finish my sentences, but he would cut her off. And so I was about to go haywire on this guy. What I started to recognize was I needed to take a break from that interaction to settle and see things more clearly. Otherwise I was going to say and do shit that was going to damage and create a lot of collateral damage that could be months and years in the making. What ended up happening was when we got off those conversations with him, I started to recognize that, number one, a value of mine had been threatened. And one of my biggest values is, and this is very similar to what you just said, when I'm in partnership with anybody, we're in this together. That's my value. We are in the same foxhole together. And when things go wrong, as they will, we are figuring out how to go to battle together and make this right. The way that he was handling it was he went and ran to another foxhole and started firing back at me and firing back at my team. And that pissed me the fuck off. I felt betrayed. I felt left alone holding the bag. So I recognized that. And then the next thing that came up, Bri, and this is kind of a corollary to anger, was Callie, my chief operating officer, Marina, my brand manager, were both even more pissed off about the situation than I was and wanted to kind of go down this pursuit of a legal path of, hey, we need to stop the sending out of these 2,000 books. We need to have them all incinerated and reprinted. The publisher made it clear that there was no way that was going to happen. And I didn't want to go down the path of fighting that fight. I knew that I can make lemonade out of lemons and create a humorous approach to handling the situation and communicating with my clients what had gone wrong. But I felt this fear of emasculation that if I didn't step to the table and fight with my publisher, that Callie and Marina were going to think I was less of a man. Neither of them insinuated that at all. Neither of them. But I was here they are wanting me to battle, and I'm the man who wrote the book, and I'm not going to battle this dude. And I came this close, Brian. I'm just my fingers are just a nose hair apart here. I came this close to embarking upon a path that it was sent me down 6 months to a year worth of emotional stress and anger and a dark cloud and litigation and you name it over something that I had no desire to go down just to protect my masculinity and to be reactive to this anger energy because I have the tools of mindfulness, awareness, our men's group, which helped me to process this. You helped me to process this. I was able to avoid all of that. and created a marketing campaign that a lot of people found pretty funny when I was like, hey, buy my limited edition Bach. We only got 2,000 copies of it. And people were like, you handled that with such grace. And, all that was a complete 180. And that's in the past now, no longer something I'm still dealing with.
I'm willing to bet that in the moment, it would have felt really good to put your hand down his throat and rip out his trachea.
Yeah.
I mean, it does, right? And that's how anger hits us. It hits us in these giant, overwhelming waves of like, I'm going to do this thing and it's going to feel so good. It even has a voice like that. It's a little bit raspy.
Yeah, it does.
But often playing our roles here on this podcast, Dominic, right? I would say the way you handled this is to Pressfield's book, Turning Pro, right? That's a pro move. To be able to feel that, wanting to put your hand down his throat and being like, no. And then having the secondary concern or fear that your COO and other people that you're working with are going to not look at you as manly, not look at you as like, well, what are you going to fight for, Dominic? So you had to deal with that, right? So you got a 1-2 punch going on here.
That's right.
In that moment, like when you're feeling both of those things, we know what you did, right? What you turned it into. But how did you get there? Like, how did you go from like rage to let's do this differently?
Such a great question, man. The first thing was like, okay, the rage came up and like I was very well aware of it. And then it was, why am I so enraged? I took a stance of curiosity. Okay, rage is here. What information do you have for me? And we talk about this all the time when we've done our emotional fluency practices. We've done countless podcasts on the board of directors of your emotions. I sit down in a chair and I'm seated as the CEO of my boardroom table. The emotion of anger and rage are there. They're going crazy and they want to be heard. Okay, why am I so enraged? I'm enraged because one of my values have been, threatened about, we're in this together. Now you've left the foxhole. Okay, got that. I'm enraged because he's not treating Callie, who's a woman that's near and dear to my heart, with respect. And I could see the misogynistic behavior, even if it wasn't intentional, just the cutting her off and the, shortchanging her. I wanted to stand up for that. And then I was also enraged because this book that I'd been working on for 9 months that I was proud about, that I'd done a really great job in getting it designed and invest money on that, now is like a disappointment and an embarrassment. I could clearly articulate and feel all of that. So now that I have all that information about why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling, which is the first crucial step, then it's like, what do I want to do with that now? And I got to look at my options going forward. And one of those options was litigation, battling, fighting. And every time I thought about that, my entire insides constricted, which again is another commercial for why emotional fluency matters. All I needed was to feel that constriction and that tightness. And I could see 6 months to 12 months shriveling up in my life. And I'm like, no way, no fucking way am I doing that. It was like, okay, well then what else is available to me? And all of a sudden, at my boardroom, the board of directors, I started to see my sense of humor stand up. And my sense of humor said, I got an idea. Why don't we joke about this? About this big plan that you had to create this masterful rollout of this new book. And instead it's a fucking Bach and it's ugly. Everything about it is the opposite of what you want it to be. We can have some fun with that and poke fun at ourselves. And I remember looking around at the emotions, and even fear and anger were kind of like smirking at that, right? And it was kind of like, okay, that's actually not a bad idea, And
thank you, humor. Thank you for standing up.
Yeah. So all of a sudden I was like, okay, now I'm going to create a PR campaign around this just being, hey, when life hands you lemons, and it worked. So that was how my whole process went down.
Yeah. And Dominic, 'cause I know this is so secondhand to you, but when you talk about this board of directors, so you took some time to actually sit down, visualize that you're at a board table. You separated out your emotions, fear, anger, humor, right? All love, all of them were at the table and they all had the ability to speak, right? And so after that, this is where the decisions came. And you said, okay, great. We're going to play with this as opposed to go down the litigation path.
Yeah.
And so that was some huge, huge, huge intelligence and a pretty good outcome, right? From the feedback that you got and everything else. I'm going to go back to my story really quick, because I exploded and then I did some other things that I'm not proud of, right? I got personal with my co-founder and, said some things that I regret. About 8 months later, doing some of this work with you around anger, I finally, after 8 months, after the damage is done, I got curious about why was I so angry? Why am I still holding resentment? This feels really heavy. One of my indicators that I needed to do work on this was me imagining if I ran into this person in New York City, how I would react.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh man, like I would explode. I told you so and everything. I'm like, oh wow, like there's a lot of energy, like not good energy, like still there. I need to get curious around it. So I finally got curious around it. And I realized there was this old part of me that when someone crossed me, when somebody made me angry, I wanted to punish them. And that's why I got personal. That's why I went above and beyond what I really had to do to from a professional standpoint. That was my software. That was like what was written in my code for how I react to this. I don't know how this got there. I don't know if it happened as a kid or genetics or whatever. It doesn't really matter. But I took it one step further. I said, where else is this happening in my life? And I realized like this idea of being angry and then wanting to punish the person was also happening in the relationships with the people I love the most. It was happening with my girlfriend. It was happening with my family. And the anger, the punishment would come out in silence and not being with that person, not responding to them. It would come in of like saying things to purposely make them feel bad, which sounds insane, but I was doing it. And so even though salvaging the business relationship wasn't going to be possible, the damage was done there, it did help me in my other relationships. Yeah. And so this idea, like what you did, and you can do it in different ways. I didn't have my boardroom of emotions. That's not the process that I took, but just getting curious around like, why is this here? What does it feel like can lead to some serious intelligence that's life changing. I can still feel like when I get angry, I'm like, wait, am I doing the punishment thing? Oh, interesting. It happens a lot less frequently now just because I have awareness around it.
Like think about the profound impact and the compounding impact that has on your relationships, especially with your fiance, especially with your closest, even your father, I know, Mr. Stacy, shout out to you. Just those interactions, right? Like if they don't go the way you want and then punishment happens every single time, like think about the distance that occurs between you and that other person, the resentment that builds. It's a cumulative downward spiral. It begs the question for, where we go in this conversation. All right. Dominic, Brian, I get it. Like anger can be a gift. It carries powerful information. So what do I do to start to build a new relationship with anger? Right. And you used the phrase before that needs to be the first decision. And the first decision is you need to decide to turn pro with respect to your relationship with anger. Right? We did an episode, 3 or 4 episodes ago about this concept of turning pro, Stephen Pressfield's book, about how turning pro in your life is this commitment to pursuing the highest version of you, right? Great man is what we call that, right? Making the decision that I'm going to pursue the great man that lives within me. And your great man has a certain relationship with anger. Right? Your great man, it's not like your great man doesn't feel anger. Your great man feels anger because it's a human emotion. Your great man just knows the way to deal with it constructively, resourcefully, powerfully. And anger can be a gift because it could be an opportunity to look at a value that's been encroached upon, a boundary, all that stuff that we just talked about. So when you get angry and then you punish somebody, or when you get angry and then you stop talking to them, or when you get angry and explode, or you get angry and because there was a trigger inside of you that's been, triggered, and you just allow it to keep happening, that's amateur behavior, not pro behavior. So a pro says, right now, when I get angry, I suppress until I blow up. That's not pro behavior. The commitment I'm making is to step into the dojo, to learn how to work with this big energy, big emotion, and to train my nervous system, right? To build the capacity to feel this big energy and then to be able to inspect it with curiosity, to know what messages it's carrying, to be able to express myself from a grounded, resourceful place that's non-threatening, that's non-violent, and then to actually make an empowered choice around how you want to deal with it going forward. That first and foremost has to be the commitment to reestablishing a new relationship with anger.
There's one belief that I had to unwind, Dominic, that's maybe a step right before that for me, which was a belief that my anger was bad. There was like a quality of badness to it because I saw in my life when other people got angry, when I got angry, bad things happened. Therefore, if I'm feeling angry, then it's bad. So I have to suppress it. I have to just eat it. Right. And so I had to get over that. I had to be like, oh, okay, interesting. Like anger is here and it feels overwhelming and I want to crush or kill something. Like that is here and it's not bad. What it is like, let's get curious around it. And that's what you're talking about. There's been 2 tactics that I've taken because I still get angry. I still get really, really angry when things happen like values or boundaries or wounds or whatever it may be. I still get really angry. And so there's been 2 tactics I've used. One is if I'm in person with someone and I'm feeling it, instead of attacking, which is the natural, I call it the golden path because it feels so good. I'm going to go do it. Instead of attacking, I say, I need to take a timeout. I need to go for a walk. When I go and get by myself, I usually do some breath work. I usually meditate, and it's amazing what kind of intelligence comes out of that space. I come back with a more refined. It doesn't mean that the anger is completely gone, but it means that it's going to come out in a refined way, that there's intelligence that I can actually share as opposed to spewing pollution all over the place and disrupting relationships in an awful way. Right, so that's one way. I'll just take a step, I'll walk away, I'll meditate and take some breaths. Now, sometimes I get angry. I mean, who can't relate with getting some sort of email or somebody at work, being in virtual work and like being by yourself while you're just stewing and angry and telling yourself the story about what happened and why they did it and how they wronged you and like, ah! And so a phrase that I heard is that we're only 6 breaths away from feeling something different.
Yeah, that's good.
So I've taken that on as a belief, knowing that, okay, before I fire off my response email, I'm taking 6 breaths.
Yep.
And that works. I'd say that works about 80% of the time. The other 20% of the time, I have to take another 6 breaths.
Yeah.
But it's pretty heavy, right? And I usually have that again is just another way to give myself the space. And those 2 things have been transformative.
Yeah. And that's 6 breaths away from a state shift is so important. And actually, it's useful to actually get into that practice right now and describe what that looks like. Because most guys will take these like 6 shallow breaths from their chest. It's like, God damn it, nothing feels different, right? Like we're talking about the 6 breaths is you place your hand on your belly, like the palm of your hand over your belly button. And when you breathe in, you push that belly out. So it's like, like one breath takes about 10 to 15 seconds, right?
Yeah, it's a great cadence that I found useful for me, and it's different for different people with different lung sizes and everything else, but 4 seconds in and then double that on the way out. So 8 seconds out. So it's 4 in, 8 out.
Yeah. And the science behind that is when you take an inhale, that activates your sympathetic nervous system, right? The fight or flight, the go mode. The exhale activates your parasympathetic nervous system, the rest, the digest, the relaxation. So when you want to calm your nervous system, then you want to take longer exhales than you have inhales. When you want to activate your nervous system, you want to take longer inhales or quicker inhales. And so this one, when you're angry and you want to cool it down, it's 4 count in, 8 count out. So those are some great practices. I mean, what we're talking about here is if we had to summarize these, maybe 3 or 4 practice tips. Number 1 is turn pro. You have to make the decision to turn pro. I'm going to forge a new relationship with anger. What is my great man's relationship with anger? How does he handle it? Get curious about that, right? Number 2 is you said create space, right? Sometimes when like your nervous system is triggered and it's haywire and anger can feel kind of like a power line, a down power line that's electric and it's like flopping around. Like it can feel scary trying to grab it because you could shock yourself and may shock you. You may need like to give it some space for it to calm down. And over the weekend, we talked about the 24-hour rule. Give yourself up to 24 hours. For you, maybe it takes an hour, but up to 24 hours and say, I'm going to maximum in a 24-hour period, give myself time to like breathe through it, get resourceful, and then come back in and have a meaningful conversation with someone else about that, address the issue. And then we talked about the 6 breaths rule. And then also number 4, I would say, is curiosity. Can you start to practice this? This anger's here. What messages do you have for me? Practice looking at it like, sitting around the board of directors like I did and say, okay, anger. Okay, rage. Why are you here? What do you want me to know?
One of my best friends, his name is Nishant Roy. Veterans Day was yesterday. And so we gave him a lot of love because he was in the Air Force and went to Afghanistan and fought for the United States and everything else. He did a podcast that came out yesterday with Rob Riggle, I believe his name is, a comedian.
Yeah.
And he shared this story, and it's so relevant to our conversation here about anger and what kind of intelligence it can bring. When Nishant came back from overseas, he found himself trying to integrate into regular life. And he started to notice things had changed. He was playing a video game with his brother. He saw his brother cheating, and he just about lost it through the controller and was so angry and so pissed off.
And Nishant is the kindest, gentlest, sweet. I've only seen that side of him. So like the idea of him throwing a controller, like I can't see it.
Yeah, Nishant has a smile on his face, 98%. I think he has a smile on his face when he sleeps. Slightly creepy, but I imagine that he does. Nishant and I were roommates in DC for about 5-6 years. And so he got really angry at his brother, and he noticed it. He's like, wow, like I really lost it there. He noticed it, but it was like, like whatever, not a big deal. About 2 weeks later, he was in a CVS in line, and someone got a little bit too close to his right side. And military training, he took the person down, put them on their back, started to choke them out until other people were saying, hey, what are you doing? What's going on here? And he released the person. It was in that moment that he's like, I think I got a problem.
Yeah.
Like things aren't going the direction that they should be going. I shouldn't be getting this angry. What's going on? And so there he took the moment to get curious about like, what is this about? And he went and got help. When he talked to the counselor about this, like he had PTSD. There was a wound that he was really dealing with and didn't know it. He felt prior to having that conversation alone, that he was the only one with the problem. But getting curious around this, taking the next best action, which was talking to a counselor and seeing that actually this is something that a lot of veterans are dealing with. And he got help that he needed to process that. And that's changed his life. It's changed his life not only from a relationship standpoint, but from a physical standpoint. Like he was having eyesight problem and all kinds of other stuff. They were dealing with the stress of like what happens when we just keep stuffing these things inside.
Right.
The steps that you took us through, Dominic, about turning pro, deciding to turn pro. I'm going to have a different relationship. I'm going to get curious around what this anger is. And then having the actions associated with what turning pro looks like is such a critical component to all of our lives and our relationships and our biology.
Yeah, such a great story that you shared, man. And I think one more thing on this that would be really important to punctuate what you just said is if you're listening to this show right now and you're feeling like, man, I've got so much more anger than I realized. We've seen some men start to associate with, I'm an angry person. Holy shit, I'm an angry person. I want to give you some grace and encourage you to say something different, which is, I have anger versus I'm an angry person. Those are two very different things. Like Nishant could have easily just started to associate and identify with this, I'm an angry person. No, that's an identity. That like at his core, he's not an angry person. He came back from some horrors of war that caused him to have PTSD that carried anger and trigger and fear, that triggered fear. So what you are experiencing right now, if you're carrying around anger, it's, I'm not an angry person, but I do have anger. And I'd like to take a closer look at it. And I want to develop a great man relationship with this anger because as I train my nervous system to deal with these big energies of fear, of anger, of sexual energy, then when the tornadoes come ripping through, as they will in life, then you can still stay rooted. Right? You're not blown away just like some, I don't know, like a newspaper in the wind. Like you are the rock, the mountain that is still standing amidst that tornado. Gentlemen, I am fired up to announce that in the coming days, we will formally open registration for our very first annual and global Great Man 100 Push-Up Challenge. Now, this is a challenge to train you and challenge you to do 100 consecutive push-ups in a row. It may sound impossible. I can assure you that it's not. Kicking off on January 1st of 2022, we are leading a group of men around the world on a 60-day journey to train your mind and your body to know no limits. We are going to be teaching you the inside secrets around push-up form, breathwork techniques, visualization techniques, group accountability, to transcend any limits that you think you have physically, mentally, emotionally. Now, I've been doing this push-up challenge, this 100 consecutive push-up challenge for over 6 years. Done the challenge 3 different times. The first time that I decided to take on that challenge, I had never done more than 50 consecutive push-ups in a row, which I thought was pretty damn good. And I did that when I was at my peak physical condition in high school. The idea of doing 100 I thought was insane, a mountain I didn't think I could climb. And the first time I did the challenge, leveraging the techniques that we're going to teach you, I did 105 consecutive push-ups. This past year, as a 42-year-old man, I did 140 consecutive push-ups. And it's still going up as I learn these techniques and tips. And I'm inviting you to participate in it as well. And one more cool thing, if this is your jam, we are also partnering with a global mental health charity called Livin' that destigmatizes mental health issues for teenagers and young adults. And we are setting the goal of raising $1 million to raise money for mental health awareness, supporting Livin'. So if you're interested in learning about this challenge, at the top of the show notes, all you need to do is email hello@dominicq.com. And in the subject line, I'll put this in the show notes too. In the subject line, just say push-up challenge, I'm in. And as soon as we have the registration that goes out, you'll be on that list. Top of the show notes, push-up challenge, I'm in, and we'll see you there.